The cavern. I've always loved exploring abandoned places. There's something hauntingly beautiful about forgotten buildings, places that time seems to have left behind. So, when I heard about an old mining town deep in the woods called Haverhill, I knew I had to check it out. The town was a ghost, literally and figuratively. It had been abandoned sometime in the early 1900s after a mining accident wiped out most of the workers. The stories said the town was cursed, that strange things started happening after the accident, and eventually, everyone just up and left. People said it was haunted, but that only made me more interested. The drive there was long and winding, the kind of route where you lose cell service and start questioning if you've taken a wrong turn. The road narrowed into a bumpy dirt path surrounded by dense forest. After what felt like hours, I saw it, the remnants of a town barely visible through the trees. Haverhill wasn't on any map. In fact, you wouldn't even know it existed unless someone told you about it. The few buildings still standing were in various stages of decay. The roofs sagged, windows were shattered, and paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood bare and rotting. I parked my car on what used to be the main street. As soon as I stepped out, I noticed how quiet it was. Too quiet. There was no wind, no birds, no distant hum of traffic, just a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to press down on me from all sides. I wandered through the town, taking pictures and poking around in old houses. Each one felt like a time capsule. There were furniture pieces covered in dust, faded wallpaper peeling from the walls, and rusted household items left behind as if the owners had expected to come back. But they never did. That I found myself drawn to the old mining office at the edge of town. It was one of the few structures that was still relatively intact. The door was hanging off its hinges, and the inside was filled with a thick layer of dust and dirt. There were old maps on the walls, detailing the mine shafts that sprawled beneath the town, along with faded photographs of the miners who had once worked there. That I don't know why, but I felt compelled to go inside. As soon as I stepped through the doorway, a sudden chill washed over me, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees. It wasn't just the cold, it was the feeling that I wasn't alone. That I shrugged it off and wandered through the building. There were old filing cabinets, scattered papers, and a broken down desk. But what caught my eye was a trapdoor in the floor. It was partially open, with a set of wooden stairs leading down into the darkness. I hesitated, my instinct screaming that I shouldn't go down there, but my curiosity got the better of me. That I pulled out my flashlight and descended the creaky stairs. The air grew colder with each step, and a damp, musty smell filled my nose. I reached the bottom, and my flashlight beam swept across what looked like an old storage room, filled with rusted tools, mining helmets, and wooden crates. Then, I noticed a passage at the back of the room. It was a narrow tunnel, the walls rough and uneven, as if it had been dug out in a hurry. I knew I shouldn't go in, but something in me felt drawn to it, like there was something down there that I needed to see. As I moved deeper into the tunnel, the air grew even colder, and I felt a strange pressure building in my ears. The light from my flashlight bounced off the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The tunnel twisted and turned, descending deeper into the earth, and I started to feel like I was walking for longer than I should have been. It was almost as if the tunnel was leading me somewhere. Then, I saw it, a faint light up ahead. It flickered like the glow of a lantern, casting an eerie yellowish hue on the walls. I slowed my pace, creeping closer until I reached a small cavern. The light was coming from an old oil lantern sitting on the ground, still burning. But that wasn't the strangest part. Around the lantern, there were footprints in the dust, leading away from the cavern and deeper into another tunnel. They were fresh. I could see the impressions clearly, like someone had just walked through here minutes ago. My mind raced. There was no way anyone else should be down here, not in this forgotten town, in these abandoned tunnels. As I stood there, trying to make sense of it, I heard a faint noise, a soft, rhythmic tapping echoing from the darkness ahead. It was coming closer, accompanied by what sounded like muffled whispers. I strained to listen, and I swear I could hear someone saying my name. Panic set in. I turned around and bolted back the way I came. The narrow tunnel seemed to go on forever, twisting and turning, my flashlight's beam bouncing erratically off the walls. I could still hear the tapping, growing louder, and the whispers. They were right behind me now. I swear I could feel someone's breath on the back of my neck. When I finally reached the stairs, I scrambled up them two at a time, bursting back into the mining office. I slammed the trapdoor shut and stumbled outside, gasping for air. But as I stood there trying to calm down, I realized something. The town was different. The buildings that had been in various stages of decay were now intact, as if they had been restored to their original state. The windows were no longer broken, the paint no longer peeling. There was even smoke rising from one of the chimneys, as if a fire had just been lit. That I blinked and rubbed my eyes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was as if I had stepped back in time. The silence that had hung over the town was gone, replaced by the distant sounds of voices and the clinking of metal. I turned to look at my car, but it wasn't there. In its place was an old-fashioned wagon, like the kind you'd see in the late 1800s. My heart raced. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I had to get out of there. That I started walking, then running, down the road I'd come in on. But no matter how far I went, the town never seemed to get any farther away. It was like I was trapped, caught in some kind of loop. The sounds of voices and activity echoed around me, but I couldn't see anyone. It was like the town was alive again, but only in some ghostly, twisted sense. Eventually, I collapsed on the ground, exhausted. As I lay there, I felt the cold chill creep over me once more, and the whispers returned, this time clearer than ever. You shouldn't have come here, they said. That I don't know how long I was out, but when I woke up, it was dark, and everything was back to how it had been before, silent, decayed, abandoned. My car was parked on the main street, just as I'd left it. I stumbled over to it, hands trembling, and drove out of that place as fast as I could. I haven't been able to get Haverhill out of my mind since. It's like a part of me never left. I still hear the tapping sometimes, late at night, and I can feel that cold chill whenever I close my eyes. I don't know what happened to me in that town, but I'm terrified that somehow, it's not over. I think it's trying to pull me back. The drive. I don't know what I was thinking when I decided to take that detour. It was supposed to be a shortcut, a way to cut off an hour or so from my drive. I had a map and GPS, but there was no signal for miles, and the roads were barely marked. But I thought, why not? What's the worst that could happen? Well, now I know that it was already late afternoon when I found myself driving down a narrow dirt road that seemed to go on forever. The trees on either side were thick, and their branches reached over the road, blocking out most of the sunlight. My car rumbled over the uneven ground, and I kept thinking I'd eventually find a paved road, but I just kept going deeper into the woods. After what felt like hours, I came across a rusted old sign that read Ashford Hollow. The letters were faded, and the sign looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. It wasn't on any map I had, but I figured I could drive through and find a main road on the other side. As I rolled into the town, the first thing I noticed was the silence. There was no wind, no birds, no rustling leaves, just a heavy, suffocating stillness. The town itself looked like it had been frozen in time, with old wooden buildings that leaned to one side, cracked windows, and streets overgrown with weeds. It was like something out of an old horror movie. That I drove slowly down the main street, my tires crunching over gravel and broken glass. The place was deserted, no people, no cars, no signs of life. The houses looked like they'd been abandoned for years, maybe even decades. A few of the doors were left ajar, swaying slightly in the faint breeze that seemed to come from nowhere. I was starting to think I'd made a huge mistake. That I was about to turn around and leave when I noticed something strange. One of the houses had a light on, a faint, flickering light coming from the window of the second floor. It was the only sign of life in the entire town, and against my better judgment, I decided to check it out. That I parked the car near what used to be a general store, its windows covered in dust and grime. The house with the light wasn't far, just a short walk down the street. As I got closer, I noticed how eerily intact it was compared to the others. The paint was peeling, and the shutters hung loosely, but it didn't look as run down as the rest of the town. The front door was half open, and I could see the flickering light coming from somewhere inside. I hesitated for a moment, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped onto the creaky porch, pushed the door open the rest of the way, and called out, "Hello. Is anyone here?" There was no answer, just a heavy silence that seemed to swallow my voice. The air inside was musty, filled with the smell of damp wood and something else I couldn't quite place. It was like the scent of burning candles, but much fainter. I stepped into the hallway and followed the flickering light up the stairs, which groaned under my weight. When I reached the second floor, I saw it, a single candle burning on a small wooden table in the middle of a dusty room. The candle was almost melted down to nothing, and its flame danced erratically, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. The strangest part was, there were no other signs that anyone had been here recently. The room was covered in dust, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling. It was like the candle had lit itself. I turned to leave, and that's when I heard it, a faint whisper. It was so quiet at first, I thought I was imagining it. But then it came again, a little louder. It sounded like someone saying my name. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. The whisper stopped, and the room fell silent again. I took a step back, ready to bolt down the stairs, when I saw a movement in the corner of the room. At first, it looked like a shadow, but then I realized it was something else, something darker. It started to take shape, slowly at first, like smoke curling up from the ground. It formed the outline of a person, tall and thin, with hollow eyes that seemed to suck in all the light. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, staring at me. That I bolted. I ran down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet, and out the front door. I could hear footsteps behind me, echoing through the empty house, getting closer. I didn't look back. I sprinted to my car, threw myself in, and fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the ignition. When the car finally roared to life, I slammed on the gas and sped down the street. I didn't care where I was going, as long as it was away from that place. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that shadowy figure following me, but the road behind me was empty. That I drove for what felt like hours, my heart racing, until I finally found a main road and the GPS picked up a signal again. I didn't stop driving until I reached a motel about 50 miles away. I checked in, locked the door, and didn't leave the room for the rest of the night. That I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, that maybe I was just tired and stressed from the drive. But later that night, I woke up to a faint tapping sound coming from the motel room window. I pulled back the curtain, and there, in the dim light of the parking lot, I saw it. A dark figure standing at the edge of the lot, just watching. It was the same shape I'd seen back in Ashford Hollow, tall, thin, with those hollow eyes. It didn't move, didn't come any closer. But it was there, and somehow, I knew it had followed me. That I left the motel before dawn and drove straight home, but I haven't been able to shake the feeling that I'm still being watched. Sometimes, when I'm lying in bed at night, I hear faint whispers, like someone saying my name from far away. I don't know what I encountered in that old town, but I'm terrified that whatever it was, it's still with me. I keep thinking I'll see it standing outside my window, or lurking in the shadows of my living room. I haven't told anyone because I don't know if they'd believe me, and honestly, I'm not sure I'd believe it myself if it hadn't happened to me. That I haven't been able to get Ashford Hollow out of my head. It's like it's calling me back, and I'm afraid that if I don't figure out what happened there, I'll never be able to escape it. But I also know that if I go back, I might not make it out again. If anyone knows anything about that place, or if you've experienced something similar, please let me know. I don't know how much longer I can keep living like this, waiting for that thing to find me again. The Mist. I've always had a fascination with old, abandoned places. There's something about the way time seems to stand still that draws me in, like I'm walking through history. So when I stumbled upon an old map showing a town called Coldwater, nestled deep in the woods, I knew I had to check it out. The map dated back to the 1930s, and I couldn't find any information about the town online. It was like it had vanished from existence. That only made me more curious that it was a bit of a trek to get there. The roads narrowed as I drove deeper into the forest, and eventually, I had to park and continue on foot. The air grew colder as I made my way through the dense trees, and the light dimmed as the canopy thickened overhead. I walked for what felt like miles, wondering if I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere, when I finally saw it, the faded wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Coldwater." The town looked like it had been abandoned for decades. Buildings leaned at odd angles, their wood rotting and windows shattered. The streets were overgrown with weeds, and there was a strange stillness in the air, as if the entire place was holding its breath. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though there was no one around. That I wandered through the town, peering into old storefronts and crumbling houses. Most of the doors were locked or swollen shut from years of exposure, but one house, larger than the others, had its door slightly ajar. It was a two-story Victorian-style home, with faded blue paint and a sagging roof. Something about it called to me, so I stepped inside. The interior was dusty and dark, the air heavy with the scent of mildew and decay. Faded wallpaper peeled away from the walls, and the wooden floors creaked beneath my feet. There were still pieces of furniture scattered about, an old sofa, a grandfather clock, and a dining table with chairs that looked like they could collapse at any moment. It was as if the family who once lived here had just walked out one day and never came back. That I ventured further inside, finding a narrow staircase that led to the second floor. As I climbed the creaky steps, I heard a faint noise, like the rustling of fabric or the soft whisper of a breeze. I paused, listening, but there was only silence. I kept going, reaching the top of the stairs, where a long hallway stretched out in front of me, lined with closed doors. The first few rooms I peeked into were empty, just dust-covered furniture and piles of debris. But the last room at the end of the hall was different. It was a bedroom, and it looked as if someone had been living there. The bed was unmade, and there were personal items scattered around, a hairbrush, an old book, and a mirror that hung crookedly on the wall. The strangest thing, though, was the writing. There were words scrawled across the walls in faded black ink, looping and chaotic. Some of it was unreadable, but I could make out fragments. "They are watching, don't leave," and asterisk, "it's in the water." Asterisk. I shivered and backed away, my pulse quickening. The house suddenly felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on me. I turned to leave, but as I stepped into the hallway, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a figure standing at the other end of the hall, just outside the door. It was faint, almost like a shadow, but I could see enough to tell it was a person, a woman, with long hair that hung over her face. She didn't move, didn't make a sound. She just stood there, staring in my direction. That I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping over my own feet, and ran out the front door. The cold air hit me like a slap, and I stumbled across the overgrown yard, my heart pounding in my ears. As I made my way back toward the main street, I noticed something else strange. The sky was darkening, but it wasn't evening yet. It was like a heavy fog was rolling in, covering the town in a thick, gray mist. I quickened my pace, but the fog seemed to thicken with every step, and soon I could barely see a few feet in front of me. That I heard it then, a faint splashing sound, like someone walking through shallow water. I froze, turning around to look, but there was nothing but mist. The sound came again, closer this time. I turned back toward the road, trying to stay calm, but the splashing followed me, growing louder and louder. I started running. The mist was so thick that I could hardly see where I was going, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out of there. The splashing kept pace with me, as if someone, or something, was following just a few steps behind. That I broke through the edge of the fog and found myself back at the town's entrance. I didn't stop to look back, I just kept running until I reached my car. I jumped in, slammed the door, and sped off down the narrow road without looking back. It wasn't until I got home that I realized something was wrong. I was still cold, even after taking a hot shower. It was like the chill from that town had soaked into my bones. That night, I woke up several times, shivering uncontrollably, and every time I closed my eyes, I saw the woman standing in that hallway. The worst part, though, was the dreams. They started that night and have continued ever since. In them, I'm standing in the middle of cold water, surrounded by fog. The air is freezing, and I can hear the splashing, getting closer and closer. I try to move, but I'm stuck, my feet sinking into the muddy ground. Then I see her, the woman, standing in the mist. She doesn't speak, doesn't move. She just stares at me with dark, hollow eyes. And every time I wake up, I swear I can still feel the dampness on my skin, like I've been standing in water. It's been weeks, and the dreams haven't stopped. Sometimes, when I'm in the shower or standing near a sink, I hear that same splashing sound, and I swear I catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. I don't know what I found in cold water, but it feels like it didn't stay behind. I'm afraid that whatever's out there is getting closer. And I don't know what will happen when it finally reaches me.